this, as well as polling data, election fraud, where we're going. I have a special guest, Mark Mitchell from Rasmussen Polling. Mark, thank you so much for joining me.
Really happy to be here. And when I heard about what we were going to talk about, I was really psyched because we are the only pollster who basically acknowledges that election fraud exists. Like, how could we be accurate if we didn't have a handle on that? So really excited about this conversation. Yeah.
So just some background. Mark Mitchell is the Vice President of Operations and the head pollster over at Rasmussen Reports. They have been digging into the 2020 data. It doesn't look good, but as they dig into the 2024 data, they are getting different response than what the mainstream media is telling us. Right out of the gate, Mark, I read the stupidest thing I've ever seen on the internet preparing for this. Right now, I'm reading that a top pollster is saying that Donald Trump was favored to win in a landslide, but because of his terrible debating skills, it's now Kamala Harris that is going to absolutely trounce Donald Trump in a landslide. Let me just show you this really quickly, and then we'll talk about it. So noted data scientist Thomas Miller of Northwestern University, recognized for his precise election forecast, has made a prediction for the forthcoming Trump versus Harris presidential election. And then it goes on to say that they believe that Donald Trump is going to lose in a landslide because of the debate. What are your thoughts on this story?
Well, first off, that guy is not a pollster. I don't know what he is, but dig up Teddy Roosevelt's Man in the Arena. He is not looking at data, and he's not even getting pollsters' data. He's just looking at their crosstabs and making some model. Nate Silver does this too, and basically, you never know what goes in their model. And so, in my opinion, it's like you're paying attention to a witch doctor. If you're an objective, free-thinking American, I think you should be looking at data for sure. I think there's reasons to trust our data, but literally do not trust some random professor at a college institution where most of them lean left to process and make conclusions for you. And I can even, if you want to get into it, like talk about things that people should look at in the polling crosstabs themselves. You do not need a pollster to be able to look at some of these Harris +4 to Harris +6 polls and instantly point out things that don't make any sense. But from a top level, Rasmussen Reports is an independent pollster. We actually do our own data, collect data. We collect more than almost anybody else because we poll every night. Right now, the New York Times, who's like a multi-billion-dollar company, they're only going into the field like one day a month right now in one of the most hotly contested elections we've had in a long time. Now, how has our track record been? It's been incredibly accurate over time. We nailed a lot of the national popular votes in previous elections, but polling has gotten harder. 2016 and 2020, Trump did a lot of very interesting things to politics. He's changed the way that people look at Republicans, and they don't have a very good opinion of them. And this whole populism movement really has changed and shifted how a lot of people think. But in 2016, and also one of the intellectual gatekeeping tools that people do with pollsters is focus on their final call. That's like saying, well, I'm going to flip a coin 100 times, but only the last flip counts. Now, I'm putting out like a steady stream of data. That stream of data in 2016 was really close, like within a point, to the Hillary Clinton 2-point and change popular vote win. In 2020, even though our final call was like Biden +1, I can't control that. The last 6 weeks of data was between Biden +1 and Biden +12. The average was Biden +6. So we were actually 2 points to the left in 2020. And as an independent pollster would, we said, hey, if we're a little too left, we'll correct with it and add 2 points of Republican weighting. And that's where we're at now. So I can tell you, we've been polling continuously for the last 10 years on Trump versus whatever Democrat of the day, right? And in 2016, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were not well-known candidates. The race, they weren't incumbents. The race was back and forth. The FBI was getting involved. And if you look at some of our charts, and I can, put one, I'll tweet it out after this video, but we put charts up that show this. They took between 40 and 44% of the vote each. It was a back and forth race, and she had edged him out at the end, but it didn't matter because of the Electoral College. In 2020, Donald Trump never had a shot in the polls. He got closest after the Summer of Love, but then at the end, Joe Biden opened up a massive lead in our polling, and we were too favorable to Biden. But a lot of reasons why that can be. Almost all of them involve public opinion for sure. But I'm just saying, like, this time around, Donald Trump has beaten the Democrat every single poll that we've put out. It was a lot bigger, a year ago, as pre-election season polls tend to be, but Donald Trump was beating Joe Biden by 5 points around the debate. And after the switcheroo, we said, well, it's going to tighten up as we get into the fall. She's a little bit of a better candidate. We probably expect a 2-point race. Fast forward 2 or 3 months, and that's exactly where we are. We're at a 2-point race, Donald Trump winning by 2 points. And like, just two important notes about that is, one, okay, maybe we're off by a point or two, right? But it's not like one poll. It's a shift in the entire time series, and even so, it represents an incredible turnaround in Donald Trump's performance like we've never seen before. I mean, he went from being 6 points down in our polling to now being 2 points up after we even sandbag. We added a whole nother Democrat sandbag. I mean, really, and then the other takeaway is that probably differs from what your viewers are getting out of mainstream media headlines. And unfortunately for the mainstream media, who, in my opinion, looks to be working very hard to try and convincingly sell a massive Kamala Harris win in the polls, I've been putting out daily numbers. Like, you can look at the chart. It has not moved much, right? Like, Trump got shot in the head and it barely moved the numbers. Wow. So, like, a debate where everybody expected Trump to be ganged up on, it didn't move anything, nor did we expect it to. The Trump earned his 49% of support now. It's the highest he's ever had. Those people, for whatever reason, have made up their minds to support Trump after guilty verdicts and assassination attempts and, all the things that Trump's been through. And that's the problem. Like, he's the change candidate. She's the incumbent. People tie her to Joe Biden. That's really bad electoral math for her. Like, how do you fix that? What she could have done was try and reach independence during the debate. In my opinion, she didn't do that and lost a really big opportunity. Looks like she was given red meat to the base. That's the kind of thing you do, I guess, when you're worried that your base won't turn out. So There's so many ways that it just points to they're doing worse this time. But if you just see a cherry-picked Quinnipiac poll, I can understand why people would get cold sweats.
Yeah. Okay, so this guy would have been better off saying it's going to be a tight race, but based off what I'm seeing, I think Harris is going to win. But to say that she's going to win in a landslide, that seems like he's putting his credibility on the line with no data to back that up. That seems crazy. Let's actually look at let's look at the data. You were talking about this nightly call. So this came off of your Twitter on September 19th. Help my audience understand what all this stuff means.
So this is something that you've never seen in the polling industry before. This is a daily tracker of our overnight numbers for a matchup. Now, we put out a weekly poll that's about 1,900 data points. It's all the same data. It's all weighted the same way. It's all the same stuff. The only difference here is, like, one night of data is going to have a lot wider statistical distribution. And so there's a 5-point margin of error here. But the reason we put it up is to combat all these fake narratives. You can kind of see what happened. So this is just Harris polling. But, Biden was taking home like 41, 42% of the vote. And then she got in the office to the candidacy. Her number shot up to 45, dipped a little bit after her initial week in August, and then started to run up during the DNC. But look, it's like hit a ceiling. Like, maybe you could say she had a tiny bit of a bounce last week because of the debate, but she's right back down to 46, 47 where she's at. That's her ceiling. And that's a bad place for somebody who's behind to be at, is bumping up against your ceiling. Looks like Donald Trump's opening back up again. So, yeah, she clawed a little bit of support from him, but he picked it back up with the not sures or maybe the RFK endorsement or whatever. But the whole point is like, when New York Times puts out a poll and then waits a whole month and puts out another poll and it moved, they can definitely turn that into some kind of narrative about Kamala Harris gaining momentum when it could just be statistical noise. And that's what I think is happening here. The media is and the media owns their own pollsters. Like they can, if your boss's boss wants a certain outcome, even if you're not a scummy pollster, there's going to be a certain amount of confirmation bias. And always in this industry, what's crazy is that the higher your average polling error, the more you favor Democrats. It's really weird. It never seems to change.
Interesting. Okay. I think you'll admit this. This is my opinion, at least. I did not believe that the ABC News debate was Trump's best debate. I felt like he held his own. There was a lot going against him. He was obviously up against three people. ABC News may or may not have leaked the questions. We definitely know that the moderators were anti-Trump. Lindsay Davis admitted that she was harder on Trump and only fact-checked him, according to her, because she didn't like the way CNN let him have open answers. So they had to be harder on him than Kamala Harris. We'll see if the whistleblower thing ends up, panning out. But even with that said, I felt like he did a great job. But you mentioned on Twitter that this was more about Kamala Harris going for like a humiliation ritual. If they could humiliate Trump, get the sound bites, then that would be considered a win, when in reality, they should have been going after independent voters, which is what I believe Trump did, saying, listen, in 3.5 years, why didn't you close the border? In 3.5 years, why didn't you make life more affordable? On and on and on and on. What are your thoughts on that?
No, you nailed it. That's exactly it. Trump is winning independents right now in our polls, but also in the New York Times, Atlas, Intel, and all the other people that show Trump winning right now. If you're Kamala Harris, you need to win the independents, and nothing she is doing seems to be aimed at that. And listen, don't just take, my opinion for it. Like, I have numbers to back it up, and it comes down to independents too. All the polls that have Harris winning have her winning independents. But I mean, we asked who won the debate, and believe it or not, not everybody, but 48% of people said Kamala Harris. Only 34% say Donald Trump. But I don't think Donald Trump supporters expected him to or wanted him to win the debate, which is why we didn't, he had, I guess, an upside chance of killing her candidacy with one shot, and he didn't get it. And I think what also everybody forgets going into this is 60% of all voters think the media is the enemy of the people. And with Republicans, it's 80%. So everybody expected them to cheat. I don't think any of that was a surprise that's going to move anybody's opinions either. So and we asked, who told more lies? The country was kind of split. So it was like a wash in many ways. But in these crosstabs, the thing that stuck out to me most about the debate, which is why I said what I did, is that 55% of voters said that they watched all of it. But if you go back out to the Biden approval part of the crosstabs, 80% of Biden's strong approvers watched all of the debate. With everybody else, it's under 50. So they watched it most. And then we asked, how would you rate the job done by the moderators? And all Americans, it was only 47% rated excellent or good. Joe Biden's strong approvers, it was 90%. So they watched it most. They loved the job the debate moderators did. And it's and listen, here's the other thing about independence. I have numbers pulled up for this one too. We asked about Charlottesville. I think we're the only people. We asked about the bloodbath hoax. I think we're the only people. And even then, a month after those events happened, when you ask independents, only 37% of independents believed the Charlottesville hoax. Only 34% of independents believed the bloodbath hoax, and the numbers have to be smaller now. That was the key of her argument. So no, even the words she spent an entire week preparing for were not geared at all to anything that independents want to hear. And then if you look at all the panels too, the exact same thing confirms our polling numbers, which is that independents hate everything she says immediately when she opens her mouth. So now ABC News, Ipsos, tell me again how Kamala is winning independents nationally. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, well, they're feeling the pinch in their wallet. They don't know who she is. They genuinely believe, whether it's true or not, that they were financially better off under Donald Trump. Those are a lot of things that the independents are believing, according to the data that I've been reading. Another thing that I read that I don't believe is true, but wanted to, pick your brain since you're a pollster. I read that ever since the debate, Trump's numbers among Black and Hispanic voters have collapsed by half. But I can't find any polling. I can't find any charts. The only articles I read appear to me to be Democrat-backed opinion pieces.
Right.
Do you think his favorability or likability among Black and Hispanic voters collapsed in half over one debate?
Here's what you got to understand about favorability. This is a great topic. We poll favorability, we poll Joe Biden job approval, and we put those numbers out, and everybody kind of has their own flavor of data. And one of the first things I look for in another pollster is where they have the favorability numbers, because in my opinion, their numbers don't match their own narratives. So we've had Joe Biden job approval, roughly at 43 to 45% recently. It's gotten as low as 38%. Everybody's given us a whole lot of crap because they say it's too high, and they put out numbers that are like 33%. But no, he got more votes than any presidential candidate in history. People do like him. It's more than so. Then there's that. But we've also asked Kamala Harris favorability, and her number has always been less than his, always, every single time, until he stepped out. And all of a sudden it did shoot up, but like to 48, right? Like she's still roughly underwater and not that great. And in our polling, Donald Trump has always gotten about a 48 to 50% favorability rate. So they're kind of at parity, which in my opinion makes sense in a race that's tight, right? Now, one of the craziest things you'll see is go to ABC News Ipsos, and they'll put out a poll that shows that Harris is up 4. But then they'll show that she's got a positive favorability, net favorability of like 3 or 4 points, and that Donald Trump is underwater 25 points. So it's crazy. Like even in the fall of 2016, when Donald Trump won the election, in their polling, he was like 33% favorable to 62% unfavorable, or something ridiculous like that. And then the other thing is like the sub samples by gender and race demographics do sometimes swing around. Like if I poll 1,000 people, I'm only going to get 130 Black voters, and maybe some of them are more Trump one time and less Trump the other. But I poll more than everybody else, and I'm getting these numbers weekly. And these are all post-debate numbers that we released yesterday, 1,800 U.S. likely voters, no movement. Black voters still go 30% Trump. Hispanic voters, it's 48 to 44 Harris to Trump. And they've moved around, but these are directionally about right. We show Trump taking between 25 and 30% of the Black vote. The debate had no impact, probably. We'll maybe see over 3 or 4 weeks, but it might be something new by then. And, the Hispanic vote has pretty much been tied. And all of those are very uncomfortable facts for the Democrats that counted on sort of these permanent majorities by pulling people onto this ideological plantation, so to speak.
Okay. Interesting. Well, thank you for confirming that. It didn't feel right when I read it, but I was like, that's interesting. Does the mainstream media tend to focus all of their time and energy on the popular vote when a lot of data shows that Trump is winning the Electoral College, but not necessarily the popular vote?
There's so much kung fu going on. It's really hard to answer. And what I would say, like looking back at it, is just use your gut and tell me how much you trust any major media corporation, understanding that most of them now roll up to major corporations that are all around the country, destroying their own bottom lines to push ideological messages. Why is that happening? It's still happening in the newsroom. And there's a million ways that they can craft narratives by cherry picking these numbers. Just to give you an example, when I do a presidential election matchup, I could probably ask the question 2 or 3 different ways. We're only asking it one right now because nobody's voting for Chase Oliver. Sorry, libertarians. But they could ask the 2-way, which is just 2 candidates, and then a multi-way, and then a 2-way with a generic candidate. So, and then you could also report the numbers as adults, and then registered voters and likely voters, right? So there you have 9 numbers to pick from, or 9 numbers for the person writing up your poll to pick from, which is why we put out, like right now, we're just doing 1 matchup question. We didn't have 2. And we only put out likely voters because that's what we think is most accurate. But if you're trying to elicit an ideological outcome, you're going to pick what's selectively best for your candidate. Same thing's going to happen with popular vote and the Electoral College vote. They're focusing on the states right now because I don't think they like what really is happening on a national level, which is even with all of this suppression polling, Kamala Harris isn't doing that great. It looks like she's in the same position. They worked really hard. They put out a lot of lying polls, and they still only got her at parity with Hillary Clinton. That's not good enough. So they need to talk about Harris +6 results in Pennsylvania, and it all really does, in my opinion, come down to Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And even, I mean, that's just a fact. Like, I can only tell you so much as a pollster. Right now, I think that these numbers really aren't going to move unless I titled my video yesterday, "An Act of God." I think Kamala Harris needs an act of God to turn her polling numbers around. And then, like, the same day I put that video out, the Teamsters thing came out. Right? That's the wrong kind of act of God. But
I want to talk about the Teamsters and Pennsylvania, but first I want to ask you, like 120 to 180 days ago, the mainstream media and left-leaning websites that I track were all bragging about this Nate Silver pollster, right? Oh, he's so good at compiling data. He's so good. Well, now his data is showing Donald Trump winning the Electoral College. They're saying his numbers aren't very good. He's not very accurate, right? Like, is the data he's putting out, if it favors what they want, he's great, and if it doesn't, he's not reliable?
Yeah, and I'll give everybody a caveat on Nate Silver. We got some history. Nate Silver is also not a pollster, and listen, I came from outside the industry, but he is not polling. Like, he's just using everybody else's numbers. And it was a clever idea, the idea that you can adjust certain pollsters for their long-term accuracy and bias. The problem is like, then he rolls up to major multimedia corporations that all are getting daily talking points from the CIA. Maybe, like, our voters think that. A majority of voters tell us they think that U.S. intel agencies are influencing political news media. So it's always tough to trust, like, he has complete control over what he puts out. And it is a statistical model, and statistical models can be used dispassionately to tell you interesting information. And I agree with the idea that some of these people need some adjustments to their polls to have them be palatable, because all data is data, right? I'm not telling you to ignore ABC Ipsos data. I'm just telling you to understand what it probably says. And the thing is it's like a black box. And I look at Nate and his public persona, and I think, well, he's probably got a lot of pressure. He's probably got a lot of, like, confirmation bias pulling at him, and he does manual adjustments to his model. And so just because he's saying, like, pro-Trump stuff now, like, he could totally just change some number in the model and say the opposite, and then he will have created a narrative. And I don't know where he's at, to be honest with. He actually defended us when 538 kicked us out of the aggregate after 538 fired Nate Silver. And I think where he's caught now is his biggest distribution channel is Twitter, and Twitter is not consuming the same mainstream narratives it was 3 or 4 years ago when he was at 538 at the height, right? Like, I think that's what Nate's going through. Kind of feel sorry for him about it.
That's interesting. Okay, let's go back to the state of Pennsylvania. Probably 3 or 4 months ago, I broke a story that a judge there said that there were hundreds of thousands of votes that came in with bad dates, no dates, or after election day that should not have been counted. And many of those went to Joe Biden in order to win. What's going on with Pennsylvania based off the data you're seeing?
Well, I'm going to give everybody some black pill news probably. And again, like I said, I think the national numbers are going to be right where they are probably, unless there's an act of God at Trump +2. Doesn't mean I don't think that this election is going to be a nail biter. And so that's how we really separated ourselves. We're public opinion professionals. We don't just call elections. We actually poll on important topics. And if the media did its job, that work that we do would be a whole lot less important. But on major issues, if you don't have somebody asking Americans, like, how are the voters going to get what they want? Just for instance, like, voters didn't want reparations for the longest time. And it always seems to be a topic that the left agenda gloms onto. It's very unpopular. But what is interesting to track is that just over the last 4 years, the Overton window for Democrats has moved solidly left, and now they support them by a majority. That's vital and important information on every single topic, and very few people do it now except for us. Election integrity is one of those issues because everybody talked about the big lie, but how can you have accountability in our systems if there's no transparent and believable investigations? And what they were trying to do is gaslight everybody that we don't need investigations because our election systems are safe and secure. I've run the numbers to show that gaslighting did not work. We asked people way back right after the election, how likely is it the outcome was affected by cheating? And it was almost half of the country. But after 4 years, that number is now 66% of likely voters think that the outcome of this election will be affected by cheating. So gaslighting didn't work there. And so what we're doing, unlike many other people, and I'm so glad to hear you talking about this because most people won't, is that if there are official investigations or reports like this that come out of the states, we'll put them on our Twitter feed. And that got us ranked number 42 on the list of the government's biggest spreaders of disinformation, and Twitter tried to shut us down. How can you be a pollster if you can't even know if elections are secured? And here's where the black pill comes in. I don't know how much has changed, to be honest with you. I think it's probably safe to assume very little has, although I have to imagine that the Trump campaign has learned some lessons, put the right kind of lawyers in place. Maybe the Republican Party apparatus has gotten smart as well. I don't know. It's good to see new leadership at the RNC because voters wanted new leadership at the RNC. The problem is, I do believe, and here's where we get into opinion, that there are likely many forms of distributed voter fraud that over time have accrued. And here's the important point everybody needs to know. As a pollster, I have no way of adjusting for that, period, whatsoever. What happens in the industry is after every election, the pollsters all lick their wounds, and then they look at the exit polling and the results, and they say, what did I get wrong? And if all of a sudden 1 million votes miraculously appear out of somewhere, and they all go for one candidate, they'll say, wow, that candidate had a lot of support. I must have missed that somehow. And now I need to adjust my modeling. And so right now I'm modeling the electorate as 35% Democrat, 33% Republican, 32% independents. If there is a significant amount of distributed election fraud due to decades of unaccountability, I have no way to know how many of those are actually real voters. There's no way, especially with how dirty the voter rolls are. And I think I've found many signals to confirm that there is a lot of suspicion people should have. Like in 2020, 20% of all swing state voters said that they got at least one superfluous mail-in ballot at their address. That's incredible. Out of their own mouths in 2020, 28% of mail-in ballot voters out of a list of 4 different types of fraud said they committed at least one of those forms of fraud. Like filling out an envelope for somebody or delivering other people's ballots or voting in the wrong state, all this stuff, right? And even we have reasons to suspect and are looking into people in our likely voter polls who say they're going to vote, who also say they're not citizens. So this is an area that we all should, this is like torches and pitchforks outside of secretaries of state's law. I'm not calling for that. I'm just saying, like, that's the level of frustration Americans have about our electoral systems, and the media is just running the other way. They don't care. They're literally just pumping out and I don't even say right or left. They're pumping out establishment propaganda because a lot of the right establishment gave oxygen to the gaslighting.
Okay. Isn't Pennsylvania called the Keystone State or something like that? Maybe I'm wrong, but it is, I believe it is the keystone of this upcoming election, those electoral votes. Right now, based off of your data, do you see it going towards Kamala Harris or towards Trump, or is it too soon to tell?
I'll have fresh data next week. I've polled Pennsylvania twice, once with Biden, once with Harris. In July against Biden, I think it was either tie or Trump +1. And in August, it was Trump -1 and Trump +1, depending on which matchup question you look at. So a statistical dead heat. Now, a lot of it gets into, well, how's our past performance been? And I'll tell you, in our 2020 states, we didn't poll that many of them. We didn't have enough funding for it. I really would have loved to have seen a lot more 2020 polling that I could have compared it to our own, right? We were 6 points to left in Pennsylvania. I think we had Biden plus 7 or something like that, right? And I, when waiting this time around in August, took about 4 points of that away. So ostensibly, if nothing's changed, we should be 4 points to the right. So still 2 points left. And we showed a tie in the middle of the DNC. So I expect next week what we'll be looking at is a poll, and there's always statistical noise, and polling states is hard. But I expect we'll put a poll out that's probably Trump plus 1 to 3, but maybe still tied. I don't expect it to go down, but you never know. Okay. But even if it does, that's a lot different than the narrative that's being formed right now based on all these like random low quality +6 Harris results that are coming out of Pennsylvania.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, I'll be watching your
Pennsylvania is going to be a nail biter, you know, because they're not going to stop voting, counting. They had a lot of mail-in ballot issues there, and I think people have not seen the amount of accountability that we should have after the stuff that people saw in Pennsylvania. Yeah.
Okay, final question. I know that this isn't polling data, but it is kind of scientific data, right? I saw that 60% of Teamsters plan to vote Donald Trump, 70% of Steamfitters plan to vote Donald Trump, 65 to 70% of United Auto Worker members plan to vote Donald Trump. And now the heads of those unions are either trying to push for Kamala or they're saying, we're not going to endorse a candidate. It's really interesting, right? When you say, like, who does this benefit? When it comes to the worker, they feel like Trump benefits them. When it comes to the person trying to cut the bottom line, keep people working at union wages or below, it benefits them to have Kamala Harris. What are your thoughts on that data?
Here's where it gets hard for me is that in past elections, I think a lot more of the number changes we saw were due to shifts in people's opinions on who to vote for. And over the last 4 years, we have seen a lot of shifting opinions. Independents went 12 or 13 points for Biden in our numbers, I'm pretty sure. And we, depending on the poll, we have independents up between 4 and 12 points for Trump. So we're talking about double-digit, close to 20-point swings in independent voters. And some of that, again, could be drifts in the data source or response bias. And I guess we'll find out. But at a certain point now, recently, you have to ask yourself, after everything that people have seen for the last decade, I mean, because Kamala Harris is very much an incumbent candidate. We don't need to get into it, but we've pulled some stuff that, in my opinion, shows that. I don't think it comes down to who's decided or not. It comes down to who is inflamed enough to turn out like they haven't before. And in my opinion, that's where it becomes awfully difficult to predict what's going to happen. But everybody's focusing so much effort and attention to this debate, which I just showed you, I don't think changed really anybody's opinions. And then the Teamster story comes out like the same week. Like, this is what's crazy. Where do those people live? It's not Alaska. They live in the Rust Belt, right? So don't show me a poll that shows Harris doing just as good in Pennsylvania as Biden did when like that data comes out of the Teamsters, right? And it's like, okay, maybe a lot of them live in Michigan, but it's like Michigan's going to poll really close to Pennsylvania. And don't show me a swing massively at the national numbers towards Trump, but then keep the state numbers at the same level when things like those Teamster numbers come out. So, I mean, and that's incredible too. It's tough for us to measure, right? Because like if I ask people what their number one issue is going to be, they're going to tell me number one is the economy and inflation. Number two is the border. So will those Teamsters, but something happened there that is very tough to measure and has a knock-on effect. And it's like, even in the polls, like there could be Trump blowout in this, right? Like, because somebody who's a devout leftist is going to pick up more polls. They do, just like the Trump people do. And they're going to tell us they're definitely like, what if they just don't feel it? They just don't turn out. Like, that could happen. So there's always a chance of an upside. There's always a chance of an act of God. There are ways the Democrats could still win this, in my cynical opinion. If President Biden steps down, I think that would give the Democrats a win. And then, there's always rolling the dice with these assassination attempts. Really scary. That would obviously give Kamala Harris a win, in my opinion. And so next 45 days might get crazy. We'll see, but the numbers don't look like they're going to get crazy right now.
Okay. Interesting. Well, I know we're up against a clock. Mark Mitchell, if people want to follow you online, should I send them to your YouTube channel and your Twitter, or what's the best place?
Like all of the above. The Twitter is where you're going to see our latest stuff as it comes out and hear us engage and talk about, especially mine, talk about what's going on in the polling industry. But like YouTube's, I have these 10, 15-minute videos where I actually look at the crosstabs and break down what's going on. It's like lightweight public opinion that I think is valuable. So I'd love to have people there as well so we can stuff it down some more throats. I'm really proud of the content we have. And I think more people need to consider public opinion because, listen, I so much public opinion stuff about the vaccines and not a single news media outlet wanted to cover it. But it's a different world now. Stuff goes viral and the media is dying, and the conversations on Twitter and, believe it or not, YouTube, everybody talks about it, censorship, but it's been our biggest partner in spreading information about election integrity and vaccine safety.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, thank you very much. I'll put those links directly down below so people can find you easily. Mark Mitchell, thank you for coming on. Thank you for the good work, and we'll keep following you and hopefully have you on again before the election. But thank you. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much. I love to come. Really appreciate it, Stephen.